Well, good morning. Today we're talking about Lion King. We're continuing our series at the movies, and if this is your first week with us during this series, what we do this every summer. Every week we take a movie and we take one of the themes from the movie and we kind of see what the Bible says about that theme. This year is a little bit different. This year we're only doing Disney movies, which is a lot of fun, because really I don't have to worry about spoilers, because most of the movies have been out for a long time. Lion King, by the way, has been out for 25 years, so I'm not going to be afraid to spoil this movie for you. Some of the movies we've talked about, though, have been Finding Nemo, Toy Story, Snow White, Peter Pan, Robin Hood. Next week, Pastor Rick will be back, and he'll talk about Aladdin. So this has just been a great, fun series. We got 1 week left after today. But The Lion King, I think, is one of the most classic Disney movies out there. It came out, like I said, 25 years ago, so 1994. 3 years after that, in 1997, it came out as a Broadway musical. Has anyone seen that one, by the way? Seen the play, The Lion King? It is unbelievable. The costumes, I think what makes it amazing is the movie has like the best soundtrack of any movie out there, which always makes for a great musical. And then just this past week on Friday, The Lion King came out with the version that you just saw the preview of, the new, like, better graphics. I mean, it barely looks animated. Has anyone seen the new one? Okay, one person. I heard it's really, really good. So if anyone's interested in babysitting a 5-week-old baby, we'll go see it. Otherwise, we're waiting for Netflix to come out with it. But the movie The Lion King has so many biblical parallels. It was honestly kind of hard to determine which direction to take this message in, as some of the Disney movies have been, because there's so many parallels biblically. But the more I was thinking about The Lion King and refreshing my memory, I kind of read through the synopsis, and my wife and I, we watched The Lion King again, the original one, and the more I was reminded of the parallels between The Lion King and the life of Moses. There are a lot of parallels between those two stories. I love the Old Testament, especially the Torah, or the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They are exciting and they're action-packed, and there's so many good lessons that we can learn from people thousands of years ago that the lessons still apply today. So to refresh your memory a little bit of The Lion King, in the very beginning, Simba, the main character, he is anointed by the monkey Rafiki to be the next king of Pride Rock. One of the most powerful scenes shortly after that is Simba and Mufasa, the father. They're out on Pride Rock, right out looking over the kingdom. And Mufasa, this is a line from the story, he says, "Everywhere the light touches is our kingdom." And the first question that Simba asks is, what about the shadowy area over there? And I thought that's a great parallel. I mean, how many times God gives us so much freedom, and even all the way back to Adam and Eve, God gives freedom, and the first thing that we ask is about the shadowy area over there. It's interesting how we're always drawn to that. And then Simba, he's enticed by his evil uncle Scar to go there. By the way, I think Scar is like the most evil Disney villain that's ever existed. He just does some awful things. One thing leads to another. A few scenes later, Simba finds himself caught in the middle of a stampede. Mufasa goes out, saves Simba, but in the process, he gets trampled by the stampede and he dies. I mean, darn it, Disney. Why do you have to do that to our hearts? Such a sad scene, Simba recognizing that his father has passed away. And even though it's not his fault, we know it was Scar's fault who kind of pushed him off the ledge. Simba is filled with so much guilt that his father passed away trying to save him, that Simba leaves and runs away, and he's determined to never come back to Pride Rock again. And that's where he meets the best characters in the movie, Timon and Pumbaa. And they teach him a flawed way of thinking, that another line from the movie, that when the world turns its back on you, you turn your back on the world, and you just stop thinking about responsibility and instead think about what Zach taught us just a moment ago. Think Hakuna Matata. It means no worries for the rest of your days. It's a problem-free philosophy. Hakuna Matata, Hakuna Matata, Hakuna Matata. My wife begged me not to do that on stage, but if you're not having fun up here, you're doing it wrong. So he learns Hakuna Matata, learning this flawed way of thinking that life doesn't, responsibilities don't matter. Simba kind of becomes like this hippie and starts eating bugs, and he's just living this amazing, relaxing life, no worries in the world, until one day his old girlfriend from Pride Rock comes back, Nala, who's out looking for food, and she finds Simba, and she tells Simba that everyone thought that he was dead as well, and she's explaining the conditions of Pride Rock now that Scar is in control, and the hyenas have taken over, and she's saying, this is great, you can come back and save us all and restore Pride Rock to its former glory. And he's apprehensive at first, and then a few things happen, and he decides to come back and to fulfill his responsibility. And he defeats Scar, and he restores Pride Rock. I mean, there's so many powerful themes in that movie, and again, it's just filled with parallels of the life of Moses. So what we're going to do now is we're going to go through the first 2/3 of Moses' life, and we're going to talk about what those parallels are, and we're also going to take some of the lessons that we can learn from Moses, and we'll talk about those lessons. We'll talk about what we can learn all these years later from Moses. So to go back before Moses was even born, all the way back to Genesis, most of us have heard of the guy named Abraham. Abraham was the one that God said, I'm going to make you the father of nations. He promised the nation of Israel would come through Abraham. Abraham, he has a son named Isaac. Isaac has a son named Jacob, whose name was eventually changed to Israel. Israel, or Jacob, had 12 sons, and those became the 12 tribes of Israel. Isaac and his 12 sons, they moved to Egypt, which another one of my favorite stories in the Bible, Genesis 25 is where it starts. I would encourage you to read that this week. But they moved to Egypt, and this one family with 12 sons grows to the point that they are hundreds of thousands of people. And by the end of it, they are probably millions of people large. Now, when they first arrived into Egypt, and for a few generations after, they were welcome guests in Egypt. They were given amazing land, and they were very welcomed into Egypt. But one of the pharaohs later on, I think he was a little scared at how big the Israelites and the Hebrew people were getting, so he decides to put the Israelites into slavery. And for hundreds of years now, they are living in slavery. And another pharaoh, he must have been getting nervous that even though they're slaves, they are still continuing to grow in population. So in order to control the population of the Hebrews, the pharaoh orders that every male child be cast into the Nile River, that every male child be killed. And Moses, who was one of these Hebrew boys, his mother, wanting to save his life, puts him in a basket that will float and puts the basket in the Nile River, hoping that his life can be spared. And it says in Exodus chapter 2, it says, Pharaoh's daughter came down to bathe in the river, and her attendants walked along the riverbank. When the princess saw the basket among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it for her. When the princess opened it, she saw the baby Moses. The little boy was crying, and she felt sorry for him. She said, "This must be one of the Hebrew children." And Pharaoh's daughter decided to raise Moses as her own son. So Moses, who was destined to grow up as a slave and then destined to die, is now growing up in the house of Pharaoh. He's growing up in royalty, the grandson, the adopted grandson of Pharaoh. I mean, does that sound God-ordained or what? So the first lesson that we can learn from the life of Moses is that God positions us on purpose for his purpose. He positions us on purpose for his purpose. In Proverbs, it says this. It says, "The heart of man plans his ways, but the Lord establishes his steps." I don't know about you, but I found myself positioned in places that I never would have chosen myself, but they lead to open doors that I will be eternally grateful for. I'm sure Moses' family, they viewed this whole situation as a tragedy, losing their son and hoping that he would just possibly survive. But what man meant for bad, God meant for good. My wife Danielle and I, when I first met her 11 years ago, she was in college studying to become a Spanish teacher. And she graduated college, got a teaching job. Things were going according to our plan. And then one day she became very ill. We went to the hospital. They couldn't figure out what was going on. They did test after test after test, trying to figure out why she was getting sicker and sicker and why she was in so much pain. And eventually they did the test to look at her gallbladder, and they found out that her gallbladder was bad. So they did a surgery, removed the gallbladder, and she was fine after that. Well, we were in the hospital for 7 days, and during those 7 days, we had some really amazing nurses, and we had some really awful nurses, 2 in particular. One was just miserable the entire time, and the other one made a pretty big mistake that could have been very costly for us. So Danielle, during those 7 days, she kind of saw what an opportunity and what really a ministry opportunity nursing can be. So as a Spanish teacher, she decides to go back to school after leaving the hospital, and she becomes a nurse, and then she goes back again and becomes a nurse practitioner. And she's viewed it since then as a ministry, as a way to help people, as a way to pray for people who are in need. And she works downtown now, and she gets to use her Spanish almost daily, translating for patients. And we've done missions work in different countries where she can use her Spanish. See, we had our plan, but God directed our steps. Our plan was go to college, become a Spanish teacher, and then teach Spanish. But God's plan was learn Spanish to be used in the medical field one day and to be used in the missions field one day. God directed our steps. He positioned us on purpose for His purpose. And she'll be the first one to tell you that His plan, just like that song we sang, His plan was so much better. So back to Moses. He grows up in royalty, and he's 40 years old, and one day he's out and about, and he sees one of the Egyptian slave drivers or slave owners working this Hebrew man very hard. And in fact, he's beating him up and he's hurting him, and something in Moses snaps. He has this urge to defend the Hebrew man, but he defends him in the wrong way. The scriptures say that he goes and he kills the Egyptian. So lesson number 2 that we can learn is that pride comes before destruction. This comes right from the Proverbs 16:18, where it says, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. You know what Moses was doing when he killed the Egyptian is he was trying to take matters into his own hands. God was going to liberate the Israelites, but Moses was trying to do it by his power, not God's power. Think about it. Moses, he was in a position of power. He could have made working conditions better for the Hebrews. He could have defended, held that Egyptian accountable, but he took matters into his own hands. And not only that, but think about this. If God's plan was to liberate the Israelites, to free them from slavery, don't you think that Moses was in the best possible position to do that? Here's someone who was supposed to be a Hebrew slave and supposed to be killed. Now he's the adopted grandson of Pharaoh. He was in a position where right where he was, he probably could have been used by God to free the Israelites. But he takes matters into his own hands. This is not the only time that Moses had a big failure, by the way. Later on in the story, when the Israelites, after they've been liberated and they're now wandering in the wilderness, they came to a time where they had no water. So Moses goes to God and he says, God, we need some water. What can we do? And God responds saying this. He says, speak to that rock before the rise, and it will pour out its water. You will bring water out of the rock for the community so they and their livestock can drink. I mean, that sounds like an awesome plan. Speak to a rock and it will provide water. But look at what Moses does. Moses gathers the people and he says this. He says, listen, you rebels, must we bring you water from this rock? Then Moses raised his hand and he struck the rock twice with a staff, and water gushed out. But the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, because you did not trust me enough to demonstrate my holiness to the people of Israel, you will not lead them into the land I'm giving them. So 2 things that Moses did wrong here. First is he didn't follow instructions very well. God said, speak to the rock. Moses, he struck the rock. Now, my hypothesis is that is not the main reason God was upset. I think he was still upset that he didn't follow instructions, but I think what he was more upset was with that statement that Moses said, must we bring water from this rock? I mean, can you sense a little bit of pride in that statement? Like, guys, come on. Do me and God keep having to provide for you? Do we have to come through again rather than giving all the credit to God? He kind of makes it seem like it's me and God doing this. My wife and I, the last couple of times we've been to Florida, someone had told us this, and we researched it, and it's true. The Orlando airport is one of the cheapest places to get a rental car. In fact, you can get an exotic car for the same price as a Kia in Buffalo. So we found this out. We researched it. It's true. So I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, we were in Orlando, and we rented a Corvette Stingray for the day, unlimited miles. It was amazing. We put like 400 miles on it in one day. Last year, we were in Florida again, and we rented a Maserati this time. Now, my wife loves Disney. I love cars, and I'm just telling you, the car is cheaper than Disney World. So I got to do what I enjoy doing. We again, 400 miles. We went to the opposite coast, all the way down the coast, and we just enjoyed it like crazy. But the first thing we did when we picked up the car as early as we possibly could, we went out for breakfast in Orlando, and we're sitting down, and I take the keys to the Maserati, and normally they stay in my pocket, but I put the keys on the table. On the outside, Maserati symbol up. And I'm just sitting there like, yep, I'm the one with the Maserati in the parking lot. I wanted my server to see that. I wanted the people walking by to see that, to think, okay, this 30-year-old, he's got his stuff together. He's got a cool car. You know what that was? That was pride that was kind of living inside of my heart. And I think and I imagine that Moses, maybe for a moment, wanted the Israelites to see and to think that he was also a provider. Yeah, God came through for them, and God did amazing things, but Moses, I think he wanted some of the credit as well. Now, here's the beautiful thing about these 2 mistakes, and it's our 3rd lesson for the day, is that we are not defined by our failures. We are not defined by our failures. Moses, he made these 2 serious mistakes. The first one cost him his position and his influence in Egypt. The other one cost him his ability to enter the promised land once they finally got there. Both were fueled by pride. But do you know what the scriptures say about Moses? The scriptures say that Moses was the most humble man to ever walk this planet. I mean, here he is making these 2 mistakes that are fueled by pride, yet he's still defined as a humble man, a man of humility. Sure, he still had to deal with the consequences of his actions, but he was not defined by his actions. I think there are some people that need to hear that today, that you are not defined by your failures. You're not defined by your mistakes. You're not defined by your past. You are defined by what Jesus says that you are. If you have faith in him, the scriptures say that you are a son or a daughter. You are adopted into the family of God. You matter to God. You are forgiven. You are valuable. You are worth it to him. So don't let others, don't let Satan, and don't let your own thoughts define you differently. Don't let them define you by your past or your failures. Let them define you by who Jesus says you are. So back to Moses, he's 40 years old, and he kills the Egyptian. Pharaoh finds out. He tries to have Moses killed, so Moses runs away to a place called Midian. In Midian, he gets married, he tends sheep for a living, and he stays in Midian for 40 years. And then God calls Moses to the greatest adventure of his life. God appears to Moses at a burning bush, and he says to him, so now I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? So Moses, he's being commissioned by God to liberate an entire nation. And one of the most important things about leadership, and this is what God was doing, he was giving Moses leadership. And you know this if you're a leader, one of the most important things is the ability to communicate. So Moses, he starts bringing up all these excuses, and one of them that he says is this. I don't know if we have this verse in I think it's in the notes, but you could follow along. Exodus 4:10-12. It says, but Moses pleaded with the Lord, "O Lord, I'm not very good with words. I never have been and I'm not now, even though you have spoken to me. I get tongue-tied and my words get tangled." And then the Lord said to Moses, "Who makes a person's mouth? Who decides whether people speak or do not speak, hear or do not hear, see or do not see? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go, I will be with you as you speak, and I will instruct you in what to say." The fourth lesson we can learn from the life of Moses is this: don't disqualify yourself from what God has in store for you. Don't disqualify yourself from what God has in store for you. So Moses was 40 years old when he fled to Midian after he killed the Egyptian. He stayed there for another 40 years old. That means when he saw the burning bush and he spoke to God, Moses was 80 years old when he was commissioned to liberate the nation of Israel. That probably had something to do with him asking, like, God, why me? I'm 80 years old, I have a great job, I got a life here, God. I should be winding down. Why are you choosing me? He asked God, who am I? He asked God, who are you? If the nation of Israel actually listens to me, who do I say sent me? He asked God, God, what do I do if they don't believe me? He reminds God the verse we just read that, God, I'm not a good speaker. I don't know if I'm the one. And then after all these reasons why, and after each one, God reassures him as to why he is the one and why God knew what he was doing. Moses tells God this, Exodus 4:13. He says, "Pardon your servant, Lord. Please send someone else." It reminds me of this clip from The Lion King. Watch this.
Look down there.
That's not my father. It's just my reflection.
No. Look hard. You see, he lives in you. Simba.
Father?
Simba, you have forgotten me.
No. How could I?
You have forgotten who you are, and so forgotten me. Look inside yourself, Simba. You are more than what you have become. You must take your place in the circle of life.
How can I go back? I'm not who I used to be.
Remember who you are. You are my son, and the one true king. Remember who you are.
No! Please! Don't leave me!
Remember.
Father!
Remember.
Don't leave me.
So Simba was full of excuses during the movie, and while he's living the Hakuna Matata lifestyle, he had a responsibility, though. And Nala reminded him of that responsibility. Rafiki reminded him of the responsibility. And finally, his father reminds him of his responsibility. He could stay where he was, or he could save his people. Moses had a choice as well. He was 80 years old. He was married. He had a job. Not all the jobs thousands of years ago were great, but this one kind of sounds pretty relaxing. He had a choice, but he also had a calling. Never disqualify yourself from what God has in store for you. Probably this week you saw, if you're on Facebook or any sort of social media, you probably saw what's called the Face App Challenge, where you're taking a picture, putting it through this filter, and it makes you look really old. Has anyone seen that or done that this week? It was a lot of fun. I did it. I put one on Facebook. There's the before, and then here's the after. This is what I'm supposed to look like when I'm older. I hope I still look almost identical, just white hair. That'd be great if that's all that happened. But it was a lot of fun. It was fun to see people posting their pictures. Some were like really bad and really made you laugh. But it got me thinking about my the legacy that I'm going to leave. It got me thinking about the fact that, Lord willing, one day I will be 80 years old. And it got me thinking, I hope and I pray that when I'm 80 years old, that I'm not just coasting to the finish line, that God is still calling me and commissioning me to do amazing things, to do new adventures in life. It's kind of heartbreaking to think about what I can miss out on now, later, and then when I'm older, if I keep disqualifying myself from what God is calling me to do. If I say to God, pardon your servant, Lord, please send someone else. God, I'm not qualified. God, I don't know the Bible like I should to be able to do what you're telling me to do. God, I'm not experienced enough to do this or to do that. I read an article this week that was titled "The Opposite of Excuses." And in it made the case that the opposite of an excuse is a reason. An excuse is justification not to do something. A reason is justification to do something. So this is what I believe. I believe that no matter our age, no matter our job, no matter our experience, no matter our season of life, what is going on at home, God still has a calling on each and every one of us. It's a common misconception that only people in ministry or only pastors have callings on their lives. I believe that every single person who's ever been created has a calling on their life, a calling to belong to the family of God, to place their faith in Christ and to spend eternity in heaven. We are called to serve God while we're here on this earth, and we're called to serve people. So let me share with you the way that some people are answering the call in the church. Just over here with this TV, there's a spot for our Hard of Hearing group that every week someone comes in and they put the script to the message on the words on the screen, and they spend their Sunday morning hitting a little button over and over and over so a group of people who normally can't hear the message can read the message. There's someone at our Medina campus, they bought 2 cases of Bibles this week. They must have been at both campuses, because here we have these little things under the seat for Bibles to go in, and in Medina we have different chairs, so we don't have those, and we should have thought about it, but we just didn't. And this person, they recognized, okay, we need some more Bibles in this church, so with their own money they went and bought 2 cases of Bibles to keep there. A group of 5 ladies from our church, they're sacrificing a week of vacation time, about $2,000, and a lot of time and energy to go to Haiti in a month and to organize and to hand out 2,000 sets of school supplies to kids that are sponsored, many of which are sponsored by people here in this room. Last Saturday, a woman named Julie Brady, who attends this campus, she organized a project where about 10 or 15 people went to an elderly couple's house and they cleaned up their entire yard. Their landscaping, they pulled bushes and brought in mulch and just weeded and weed whacked, and they took care of this elderly couple who for years and years had been serving here at the church in the office. A man named Rick Mule, many of you know, he organizes a landscape team. What I love about Rick is he's such a humble servant. He's here almost every single week, sometimes multiple times, watering the gardens He's here pulling weeds and making our facilities look as beautiful as they are. A woman named Tamara Weigel, she puts in hours a week doing whatever is necessary for the campus in Medina. Before they transitioned to that campus, they were here, and she would spend hours a week scheduling volunteers and running our guest services team. Every single person on this worship team, they're here Thursday night for about 2 to 3 hours practicing the songs. They spend hours at home going over the songs, learning the chords, learning the lyrics, and then a Sunday morning for them is a long day. They're here at 7 a.m. till noon, practicing and getting ready and leading us into worship. Right now, your kids are being cared for by volunteers who feel called by God to influence the next generation. In our middle school group and our high school group on Wednesdays and our Monday night youth group for the kids in Medina, there's these volunteers that are called. Here's one you may not even know about because they fly under the radar, but we have a safety team here at the church at both campuses. A guy named Rob Kowalski felt it on his heart to start this safety team, and now it's full of medical professionals and security that keep us safe on a Sunday morning, so that they meet and they do training things, and they're here every single week, flying under the radar to keep us safe on Sundays. And I could go on and on. I could spend the entire message telling you story after story about people who felt called by God and decided to, rather than make excuses, they listed their reasons and decided to do something about what God was calling them to do. I mean, we are just filled with heroes at this church, and it's a blessing. We have something like 200 volunteers every single month that do something at the church. Why? Because they have more reasons than excuses. They'll happily admit that they've failed at things in the past like we all have, but they've chosen not to be defined by their failures. They've chosen to be defined by who God says that they are. If you don't hear anything else that I hear today, hear this. God is not done with you. God is not done with you. I don't care the season of life you're in. I don't care your age, what job you have. God has a purpose. God has a reason for you. The question is, are you going to make excuses or are you going to list your reasons? Why are we going to serve people? It doesn't have to be in these four walls. There's people that do amazing work in different organizations, different volunteer opportunities in our community, and they are still fulfilling the calling of God. What is your reason and what is your calling? Would you pray with me? Father, I thank you so much for the lessons that we can learn from a movie like The Lion King, and the lessons that we can learn from the life of Moses. God, we thank you for the incredible things that you did for him and the story of how he did liberate the nation of Israel. God, he set them up for success, and God, you used an imperfect person for your perfect plan. And God, we ask that in our own lives, that you would use our failures. God, that you would help us to know that we are defined by who you say that we are. God, be with us. Make your calling clear. Give us the reasons why we should. God, we love you, and we pray this in Jesus' name.